Just so you do know, we are recording. You're more than welcome to send me chats if you don't want to talk on your microphones. And you're also more than welcome to just ask questions as we're going along out loud. Just when needed, I will be pausing during the lesson. So if it's a question that can wait, if you can wait, but I have no problem with you just kind of shouting out and saying, hey, I've got a question, can you clarify, or can you answer this question for me?
It's not done. It's not done.
Okay, I'm going to mute all just for us to get started, unless anyone wants to say hi. I'm going to mute the microphones, but you're more than welcome to unmute it and ask a question, all right? Okay, so I want to introduce myself first. Bear with me today. I'm a little bit nervous because it's the first time I've ever taught a live session and done a lesson like this online. But I'm really, really excited about this opportunity and the way that Graduation Alliance is moving to help students have more interactions with me and other teachers. I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'm really excited to get to interact with you guys. So I have been a teacher for 13 years, 1 year so far with Graduation Alliance, and I'm absolutely loving it. My time as a teacher, I've taught so many different subjects. I teach English, I've taught science and history, art, all kinds of English, several kinds of history and sciences, and I absolutely love being a teacher and helping people learn things and hopefully helping them interact with their world in a better way. So in that note, I'm very excited to be here, and I'm actually really excited about the topic we're going to be covering today as well. Because as a teacher, I have on our Graduation Alliance or on the lessons, I've actually noticed a need for this type of communication for students to understand how to analyze nonfiction text. So today's overall plan, we're going to talk about some important terms we need to know, not just to analyze nonfiction, but also to correctly complete one of the assignments that is in English 9 semester 1. Even if you're not in English 9 semester 1, I promise you what we're going to go over today will be very, very, very helpful. So please stick with me, ask questions, and during our question time, I can totally answer anything else you have questions for, because my role at Graduation Alliance is actually to do lots of things, but I grade assignments, but I've also written curriculum. So I'm grading 9 and 10 right now, but I've written and helped write some all of the curriculum for the 11th and 12th grade English. So I understand those and can help you with any of those assignments. So if you're in a different class, still stick around. I can help you with whatever you need help with. So our essential questions are going to be, what are allusions, similes, metaphors, and direct quotes? We're also going to be defining nonfiction today as well and talking about its importance. So what are direct quotes and how can I use them in analysis? What is annotation? And how do I use it to read nonfiction? And not just read nonfiction, but we're also going to really kind of use annotation to think more thoroughly about what we're reading and the ideas we're looking at. So do we have any questions before we get started? Okay, I'm going to kind of move down here then. So the first thing I want to do is the first part of the lesson, we're going to talk about the skills and the things you need to kind of know, the know-how, and all those like lecture elements, the terms and what annotation is and how to use it. And then I'm going to open the floor for some questions, and then we're going to go back and actually annotate the part of the letter from Birmingham from Martin Luther King Jr. And I think from the way we're going to annotate it, it will help you pick out the correct answers for your assignment. So, but I tried to make sure I focus this assignment or this little bit of a lesson so that you can use it in a lot of different areas in your English classes, but also Nonfiction is going to include your science and history and really so many of your other classes that this will be really helpful. So let's get started with words to know. An allusion is one of in my opinion, one of the most important literary terms to know. And it's alluding to, or it's when we refer to something else. If I make a comment about how Eve ate the apple in the Garden of Eden and how that creates sin, when I just make a comment about eating the apple in the Garden of Eden, we have all these other ideas attached to that story. And so as an author, I can make a reference to that or refer to it, and then you're going to understand kind of the theme maybe that I'm already talking about without me having to do a lot of extra writing and bog whatever I'm trying to say down with other details. So an allusion really helps readers and writers get a big idea down really, really fast. So it's when we refer to a famous piece of art or literature in order to increase the audience's understanding of a topic. So I think that's one. Simile and metaphor, I'm going to guess a lot of you are very familiar with, but allusion is extremely important, and it's used a lot more than we think it is. And there's lots of kinds of allusion. We talk about like biblical allusion, which would be kind of like your Adam and Eve story, if I wanted to use that, or maybe I talk about the animals in the ark kind of thing. Or you can also then go into maybe a mythological, when we might refer to Zeus or Thor or any of the gods in our mythology. So, and there's other things. We have David for a statue. We have, it doesn't just have to be in literature. It can be referring to things in art. Maybe we're going to say something about how we're going to split things up like Picasso does, and we're referring to his cubism in his artwork. And so there's lots of different ways that we do allusion. The other two really kind of work hand in hand, and they do the same thing, but they're just structured very slightly differently. So simile and metaphor, and what they both do is they're comparing two unlike items in order to prove a point and to draw attention to something specific. But a simile uses the word like or as in order to do it. So her hair is like a waterfall, or her hair, the waterfall of her hair moves down her back. So her hair is like a waterfall as a simile, where the waterfall of her hair moves down her back. That's a little clunky. I'm always bad at metaphors, but is a metaphor because we don't use the word like or as. So I'm going to talk about direct quotes a little bit further when we can actually see them in action, but I want you to be able to define nonfiction, because this is the meat of why we're here today. Nonfiction is any text that is true. It could be biographies, informational essays, speeches. It can hold, it could be your textbook, it can be a history book, it could be a story of a history battle. There's so many types of nonfiction out there. And though I love my fiction and I love my literature that is stories and these great epic things, what we as thinkers and human beings and citizens see every single day is nonfiction. And we have to be able, and because it's all that information that's given to us. And in a world with computers and all the information we get from social media, we need to be able to read what is being given to us as information and sort it out and understand what they're trying to do with it, what they're trying to say, and how they're trying to influence us in order to make informed decisions. So if I was going to tell you as an English teacher, the most useful thing almost that you can learn how to do, it is going to be analyzing nonfiction, because of the bombardment of information we get daily. You need to be able to kind of sort through it in order to create your own ideas so that you're an educated thinker. And that's a big deal when you're looking for a job, when you're doing your job, depending on what your job is, when you're reading news and voting. All of those things help you make decisions about your life. So that's an important skill. So do we have, I'm going to just pause really quick with the words to know. Do any of you have questions about those 4 terms yet? If you want, you can also send me a chat and I can just read it there as well. So let me know, and I have no problem stopping as we keep going. I'm going to talk about annotations today. When I was trying to figure out how to help you understand analyzing nonfiction, a big part of analyzing nonfiction is reading it and knowing how to read it. And so I still do annotations, and I know some of you, especially if you have been in a brick and mortar, a physical school in the last couple of years, you've probably been buried in annotations. And I'm going to tell you to just do the annotations you need to do. But annotations are really, really useful. I still do them when I read things. And I've been in school a long time. I've been out of school for a very long time. And I still, when I read something, especially when it might get confusing, I like to write on it if I can, in order to kind of get my thoughts together about what I'm thinking about what I'm reading. So it may seem odd to think about the best way to analyze or to think critically about something in order to determine its deeper meaning and deeper understanding, but it is to read it. But I don't want you to just think of your typical skim read, because I could see most students, my child I know does the same thing. She just skims through something to get the main idea, but we don't really analyze if we're just skim reading. So the annotations allows you to dig deeper. It rips it apart in order to put it all back together so that you have a better understanding of it. And we accomplish doing this through something called annotations. And I can seriously hear you, some of you probably rolling your eyes, but kind of going, not more annotations, but annotations really do help. So annotations are not something we make up just to torture you. It is a written form of dialogue between the author and the reader. Some of the best learning I've ever done is getting to talk to somebody, but we can't always talk to people who share ideas with us. Those things actually happen when on paper, when they write maybe an informative essay or they write a speech and they say it to us, and we either read it or we see it on TV, but we can't talk back to them. But if we can read it and tear it apart ourselves through annotation in order to figure out if we agree with them, we don't agree with them, it really is a helpful thing when you're analyzing. So I'm going to skip down here really quick to, these are the things to look for, or the things to do when you're annotating and analyzing your nonfiction. So the most important place to start is with something called CAPS, and it's CAPS, and it stands for context, which in the case of the letter to Birmingham is actually going to be your historical context around the civil rights movement during Martin Luther King's life. And we're going to look at some of that in a bit. And then we need to know who the audience is. Who does the author intend to tell this information to? Because they're going to tell us certain things based on the audience that they're speaking to. And then what is the author's purpose? And what does the speaker think about all these things? What might have influenced their thinking, their words, all of those things. So it's really important to establish CAPS at the very beginning. And then another thing you want to pay attention to is something called, we use it all over the place in English, which is bias, but I think sometimes we think of that as a negative word anymore. So I think it's important to think of their slant or their spin as well when they're speaking. As a teacher, I'm definitely probably biased, or at least have a specific spin on something when it comes to education or how my students are doing, or what I think my students need. So I am a little bit biased, but it's not always a bad thing. But as an audience member or as a reader, we need to understand where our speaker is coming from. So the bias, the spin, the slant is really important to recognize when you're reading nonfiction. Another thing to think about while you're reading or annotating is evidence that you can use. This evidence right here, you guys, is going to be in a big way your that is your direct quotes, and it's going to help you understand if you believe or trust the speaker or not. So you want to recognize the evidence that they're providing in order to see if you believe them, and then that evidence can also become part of your evidence or your direct quotes to prove your thinking, to prove your analysis. And then the appeals. Your logos, your ethos, your pathos. How are they trying to influence you as an audience member? I'm not going to go into those because I know we go into them a lot through 9th through 12th grade English. I think you see it in every single year or grade level. So it's very important, though, that you understand how the author is trying to impact or influence your thinking. And then the other piece is the fun stuff. It's what I call the wow. How do they say things? Do they use allusions? Do they use similes? Do they use really interesting words, powerful words, great images? What is it that makes us go, this is cool, this is interesting, I totally disagree with them? Whatever it is, their word choice really influences if we really get into the material or not. So it's really important how we look at the literary devices too, because they influence our enjoyment or our emotions of the piece sometimes. And so then it obviously is going to impact if we agree with them or not. So those are the lecture side of this lesson. That's pretty much all the pieces. We've got our words to know, and then we have the ways to annotate. Ray, so persuasive appeals, that's a different lesson. If you want, we can go through the persuasive appeals, which is those logos, ethos, and pathos. There's also, we have our fallacies that we could go through, but I can quickly define them for you really quick. And if you need more help, I know that's one of our topics for these sessions that we're doing. But if you need more specific help, I can always meet up with you afterwards as well. But I'll go over them briefly for anyone who's wondering what the persuasive appeals are and how they influence us. So these are the logos, ethos, and pathos that are under the appeals. And logos means logic. So if you wanted to write that down somewhere, especially if you're struggling with those areas, and all that is we're using our facts and our datas. The pieces, the numbers, there's so many people who are going to be like, well, 3 out of 4 people agree with me, so I must be right. And that number is a really important part of other people believing what they have to say. So all that data is really important. We're a very science-driven or data-driven culture. And so logic is a big deal. And not only is the logic about data, but it also is, does it make sense? If they're making and spewing off these things that just don't make sense, or the puzzle pieces aren't fitting together, you're not going to believe what they have to say. So that is the appeal. They're going to appeal to your logic or your thinking. Ethos is, it has to do with ethics, but it also has to do with authority. Do you trust the person to tell you that this is a good idea? Okay, so I use this one a lot, like in To Kill a Mockingbird, which a lot of you might not have read it yet, but Atticus is a lawyer, and he talks about the laws and how they're important to the people, but it wouldn't have mattered in the book or in the story if he was talking about the laws if people didn't respect Atticus. So that is an authority. You have to want to listen to the person who's giving you the information. And so that's part of ethos under the authority. On top of that, ethos appeals to your sense of what's right and wrong. So you have to trust what they're saying, and that what they're telling you that is right or wrong is actually ethically correct. It fits your morals. And so if you're going to be talking about something maybe like capital punishment, or immigration, or any of the really big hot topics right now, you have to trust the person that who's talking to you if you're going to trust that their morals and their ethics are right. And that's where ethos comes from. So that's why authority and who's speaking goes along with it. And then pathos is probably the one most used these days. And it's the one that kind of grips us and gets us moving and very upset or very happy, because pathos messes with our emotions. And so when you see, so one of the ones that's a little bit funny but very sad at the same time, but I think I've seen the commercial so many times. There's the animal, like saving the animals video with Sarah McLachlan's song, in the hands of an angel, in the arms of an angel. And that song is extremely emotional. And then you see these images of these dogs that are so, or other animals that are horribly treated. And all that is intending to do is amp up our emotions in order to donate money to the cause. So that's playing off of our pathos. But pathos can be positive too. I mean, how many times do you start hearing like, we are the champions, and you start tapping your foot and you're like, I can like move mountains, because they use that song because there's so much emotion behind it, and it's a positive way to get you to act as well. So fear is probably the easiest pathos to play off of. But I do think the fun stuff to me is watching when the positive pathos, positive emotions kind of get people moving in order to achieve great things. So those are our appeals, and none of them are wrong or right or bad, not right. None of them are bad, but you have to be aware of them so you know how you're being affected. So just a quick reminder, logos is logic, using data and like it makes sense. Ethos is about who's speaking and if you trust them to tell you what's right or wrong. And then pathos plays off your emotions. So I hope that helped clear some of that up for you. But it is a really important thing to pay attention to, especially when we're talking about like political information, or when we're looking at nonfiction information that is kind of sensitive material. I mean, when we start to look at immigration, or we look at issues of abortion or foster care or war, all of those come with these huge, heavy pieces of baggage. So you want to be able to know how you're being appealed to when you kind of get caught up in the moment. So Daisha, I think I'm saying that right. You said you can't hear anything in your volume. I recommended this with another student, is to quickly log off and log back in and watch for where it asks you for the microphone. Oh, she can't hear me. So I'm talking to her and she can't hear me. I'm going to, I need to message her really quick. So I'm actually going to open the floor for other questions, if anyone has questions before we move on to the other activity. Okay. So let me see if I can see. Hopefully she sees that. Okay. Oh, whoops, I sent that to Ray. Just a second. Okay, now I think she should be able to see that. Okay, so since there are no questions, I'm going to move on to the next part. I'm going to, because we're already at 5 o'clock, I have like about 5 minutes of videos. They're in 2 different videos, but one of the most important pieces of understanding nonfiction, especially historical nonfiction, meaning something that comes from a different time period, is understanding the context. So what you'll want to do is, if you read something and you're like, think I'm missing something, because I think there's something else I'm supposed to understand in order to understand the importance of, say, the letter from Birmingham. You might want to do some research on the time period, and I really think that that will help you understand the material you're reading. And honestly, context is probably one of the most important things to research or annotate for. So I went in and I found a couple different videos, and I'm going to play the YouTube video first. It's a 2-minute video because it talks about our audience, or who the letter was meant for. And I think that that's really important part of the context in order to understand the piece of the letter that we're going to annotate. So we'll start with that one really quick. Going to put that to full screen.
And I say segregation now.
No, I don't want that.
Forever.
To Alabama Governor George Wallace, the continuation of segregation was a solemn promise. To Martin Luther King, it was a scourge he vowed to overcome. In the city of Birmingham, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, whose church and home had been bombed because of his activism, began a campaign to integrate the downtown shopping district. King joined him in March of 1963. They both expected an extreme response from Public Safety Commissioner, segregationist Eugene Bull Connor.
One of the good fortunes of the civil rights movements were its enemies. Where could you find a better enemy than Bull Connor of Birmingham?
King submitted to arrest on April 12th, Good Friday, to draw maximum press coverage. Attorney General Robert Kennedy had asked King to avoid confrontations with police, wanting to pursue civil rights gains through the courts, not the streets.
Dr. King said, "Mr. Attorney General, I can best serve this country and my people by focusing on the evils of segregation." He said it's a corruption of the society. It's a corruption of the soul.
Sitting in his jail cell in Birmingham, King wrote about that corruption. He responded to an open letter that appeared in the Birmingham News that same day. It was titled "A Call for Unity" and was signed by 8 white clergymen. Their appeal made reference to outside leadership, calling the protests unwise and untimely. King wrote in the margins of that newspaper, "I am in Birmingham because injustice is here." He went on, "Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known." The sentiments King expressed in the letter had already made an impact on students who had committed themselves to civil rights activism throughout the Deep South.
Oops. I'm going to pause it there because the rest of this video goes on to talk about what happens after the letter. But I want to play, because this talks about your audience, what we just watched, but this other one from the Smithsonian is really important to understand the civil rights movement and the need for it because of segregation in the South. So I'm going to, it might take a second to load. So while we're waiting for that to load, does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, let's see here. This is taking, it was preloaded, but my computer's been a little wonky today. I really liked the other video because it talks about the 8 clergymen. If you're not aware, clergymen is just another word for men of the church. So they'd be officials of the church, not just church members, but they'd be people who, like bishops and your pastors and different people who are in charge of the church and giving the sermons and everything like that. So this video, though, demonstrates, and we're going to watch the whole thing. It's only 1 minute and 54 seconds. This is really powerful images from what was going on during the time that led to Martin Luther King actually going to Birmingham and really kind of knowing that if he showed up and led a non-violent protest by marching, he was going to get arrested. I think earlier today I read somewhere where he said that by being arrested, it drew more attention to the problems that were going on in Birmingham. So let's play this really quick, even though it is actually supposed to be playing. So it should start here, hopefully any second. Well, maybe. Here we go. I hope. Biggest fear today doing this lesson was whether or not my technology was going to work for you guys. Okay. Maybe we might have to skip it.
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
African Americans in Alabama have had enough. In spring 1963, in the state's largest city, Birmingham, they stage nonviolent demonstrations. Wallace responds. Protests are banned. Those arrested forced to pay high bail. Then, America's most prominent civil rights leader comes to Birmingham. April 12th, Good Friday. Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy lead a march from the 16th Street Baptist Church. They are arrested. It is here that King pens his now celebrated letter from Birmingham jail, defending the resistance of African Americans. In solitary confinement, he writes, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." The letter becomes a touchstone for the civil rights movement.
Okay. So I'm hoping, actually, I'm gonna put this out there. Even if you just want to message me on chat, can someone tell me something that they think was important for the context? Remember, it's information about the time period or information about our speaker that we can use when we're understanding what we read. Oop, that went away. Okay, let me go back to my. So let's see. So we talked about clergymen. What else can you see? What was it a peaceful time or was it a time of struggle? That would be something to note. So I'm not gonna give you answers, but if you want to, even on your own piece of paper somewhere in your head thinking about this, you want to think about what's going on during the time. That's a really big deal. And then I hope you caught the information about the church and the letter that was sent to, it was actually published in the newspaper, but it was a really important avenue, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. So does anyone want to add to what the context might have been? Okay, because I did not know how much to plan, I want to move ahead because I want to make sure we have enough time by 5:30 to actually do the annotations, because that gets you to the lesson itself. So I'm going to pop over really quick to the actual assignment that we're going to be talking about today. That's all of this is led up to. All of the stuff prior to this is really those skills you should be carrying with you, and you can use them in so many different areas and different assignments. But my internet is very slow today. So in Buzz, this is in unit, it's semester 1 of English 9, though there are several assignments where you have to do things like this throughout the next 4 years, not just English 9, but it's lesson 5 or unit 5. And so I'm going to skip the historical context video because it is just a video and we've already talked about it. But if under 5.2, it actually has, if you go in here, it tells you that you're going to be reading the letter from Dr. King. So this is the letter that Dr. King, it's pieces of the letter. I highly recommend, if this is something you're interested in, that you actually go and read the whole letter. It's really powerful. But this is just pieces of the letter to help you learn how to look at elements of nonfiction. So we're going to be looking at this very closely here in a second. But what I did is, I can't write on the assignment, and this is what I recommend as from a teacher to a student, and I like to try to think like a student because I'd love to stay a student my whole life. What I would do if I were you and I needed to annotate this or I wanted to mark it up, and is what I did today. I copied the whole letter into an empty document, and then I'm going to make comments on it for you. Some of you, I prefer actually the feel of my pencil on the paper. It does something for me in my brain when I'm learning, but a lot of you are probably very used to working online. So you could just do this how I'm going to do it today, which is through Google Docs. Okay, so I just copied this into my lesson that I'm going over with you. I want to remind you that what we're actually going to be doing is looking just at these 3 paragraphs, and we're going to try to figure out our caps, our slant or our bias, any evidence they might use, some appeals, and then literary devices. And what I call wows. Wows are those, whoa, did they really just say that moments? There's other times you might need to look up a word that you can mark. So to do this in here, I'm going to do this, I'm going to mostly focus on caps, because I will tell you this as a little hint. Your questions for this activity actually will, if you can recognize caps and your lit devices, you probably will get a really good grade on your activity, okay? And then the slant and your evidence and your appeals is kind of the things that are influencing you, and we will talk about those. So, my dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statements calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that crossed my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. So the very first thing you got to do is just read it, and read the whole thing, and don't just skim. You want to actually read the material. And then I would go in and start marking things up. So I'm going to grab my highlighter to do this. I don't like the really bright yellow, so I'm going to do a softer yellow. But so we have clergymen. So this tells me who my audience is right away. So I'm going to highlight that real quick with this color. And I might even make a comment. Maybe I don't know who these clergymen are. Who are these men? But they're clergymen, so they have to be part of the church. So I'm just going to put that down. Maybe because of my question, I might go in and look up who are the clergymen. And I actually did that this morning. Just so you're aware, it's even teachers, even people who read this stuff and are always kind of having our hands kind of dipped into this material a little bit, we still have to look things up. And I went in to look at that letter from the clergyman that he is responding to in order to prepare for this, but I also found it fascinating. So that is our audience. They're churchmen, which we found out because we looked up our context too for our history. So that helps. We know he is in jail. So he is in jail. And for me, understanding that he, that's kind of upsetting. For me, knowing that nonviolent protests are part of American history and a part of how we get things changed, that he was arrested for walking down a street's a big deal. So that's one of my wows. So I came across your recent statement calling my present activities wise and untimely. So what this is doing is telling me he's responding to something else. And then he says seldom, which that just means he doesn't do it very often. Seldom does he answer criticism, but he felt like he needed to. And I remember reading, he tells me down here that he is responding because he hopes the churchmen are actually going to be helpful. So that's a note for me, because I think he isn't wasting his breath. That's what I got from the paragraph. He's not wasting his breath with people he can't change because they're extremely against him. He actually thinks they're reasonable and he thinks they might listen to him. So he's trying to decide. So he decides to write them a letter. So let's see here. The other thing, and the reason I know that he doesn't respond to things is right here, that if I sought to answer all the criticism, he's letting them know that they're special, that he doesn't respond to everybody, but he felt like he needed to respond to them. So I'm going to make that comment because he's saying that he doesn't do that there. So then I would go down to the next paragraph, and I'll just probably do this paragraph and I'll make sure I've hit my caps. So right now, remember, caps had context. We have audience. His audience technically are the clergymen, the churchmen. His purpose is trying to sway, which we've already figured that out, he is trying to sway the churchmen to, onto his side, and why it was important to protest. And then the speaker, there's a couple things. We know who Martin Luther King is. Most of us probably do, at least. I'm assuming that. But we also need to recognize that he's very respectful in the way he's speaking to them. He has a name calling. He's really treating them with respect and trying to open a dialogue or open communication between the two groups. So I have my caps figured out within the first paragraph by just closely reading. Obviously, there's a spin on this. He's hoping to show why it's important to protest. Okay, so let's do, I'm actually going to read this last paragraph because I think it will establish some of our literary devices as well. Okay, so, but more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to Macedonian call for aid. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and I'm really hoping you can go back to the word choice and look at those 4 things, and somebody tell me one of the literary devices that were being used. I'm going to highlight some words. So let's see who can figure out what one of them would be based on the words I'm highlighting, okay? And you can just put it in the chat. You don't have to like shout out, but you're more than welcome to talk as well. So to remind you what the words were, our literary terms that we have, we had allusion, metaphor, and simile. The allusion is referring to other famous stories, and our similes and metaphors are comparing things. Simile is using the word like, where metaphor does not use the word like. Anybody want to try to give me an answer? I know you got it in you. So another clue, especially with 3 of these, would be we've got prophets, Apostle Paul, and Jesus Christ, which all come from a very famous book called the Bible. And then the other one, because there's just 2 of them, the other one uses the word like to make a comparison. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to let you look back at the notes or the page I gave you, because this is actually one of the questions in your assignment. So I don't want to give it away, but this should help you get there. In your activity, you're going to be asked to identify one of the literary elements or literary terms or literary devices inside here. So if you look at this paragraph, there's 3 times that something is referred to from the Bible. So that would be one of those 4 words at the very beginning of the assignment. So you can look back at those definitions. And then there is a comparison. He's comparing himself to Paul. You have to decide which one that would be. So there's 2 items and you get to use them. So those are your 2 choices for that question. So I'm going to leave those here for you to see, and maybe mark it down or make notes of that. But you need to look back at the word choices to decide whether or not which one it is. So that does help you. It gives you your 2 options and where you can show your evidence. Okay? So again, the prophets, Apostle Paul, and Jesus Christ are all references from the Bible. And so that's one of those important terms we talked about at the beginning. And then this last sentence is he's comparing himself to Paul. So then you have to decide which one that is on the 2 terms that compare. Okay? I hope that helped a little bit, because that's when students tend to struggle just a little bit for. And it asks you for evidence. So you can say that Martin Luther King uses blank literary device because he mentions prophets, Apostle Paul, and Jesus Christ, which come from the Bible. And that would be giving evidence and answering the question correctly. Okay? So I hope that part helped. Let's look back up here to double check that I did caps. We talked about our context. We talked about our audience being the clergymen, that His purpose is to persuade the clergymen onto their side about protesting. The speaker is very respectful. We know it's Martin Luther King, so he was fighting civil rights laws. In the middle here, he is actually giving why he's here. Because one of the major claims from the clergymen was that he's an outsider who doesn't need to come and stir up trouble. And so when he comes in here, he mentions that they argue against the outsiders coming in. So I'm going to mark this up for my annotations because that's really important. So outsiders coming in, he is talking about himself, that he's the outsider because he did not live in Birmingham and he came in and protested. But he shows how he's not an outsider with all of this facts. These would be our pieces of evidence, right? That he is a president of the Christian Leadership Conference, and it works in every southern state, including Atlanta, Georgia. So this is your evidence that proves how he is not an outsider. So I'm going to mark that as evidence that he is not an outsider. So there's that part. So we also have evidence. We've talked about literary devices. And then the appeals. I actually think the biggest appeal here, clergymen or churchmen, and he's talking about it in this last paragraph. He's talking about how Christians were persecuted and had to go out into the world and carry their message, just like he's trying to do. So he's actually using material that the churchmen, the clergymen, would be very familiar with. So that is I would say some ethos, because he has authority, because he is part of the Christian Leadership Conference, but then he also, it's a little bit of that pathos as well, because he's kind of using the idea of inclusion and wanting to be Christ-like, which is a big deal, obviously, for people who would be leading churches. Okay, I want to make sure we have enough time to ask questions. So I'm hoping that this has helped. I'm hoping reading through this helped you understand it better if you're struggling with understanding it, and helped you get to some of the big ideas. For sure, I helped you. We have gone over enough information to help you answer all of the questions in the activity. I just didn't tell you that I was answering them for you. So you'll have to go through and try to do that. The last thing I want to say before I open up for questions is this one. What I see is, from a teacher's point of view, is that you guys, so a lot of times students will give a one-word answer when it asks you to explain in a paragraph, or it'll ask you to give evidence. You really need to provide textual evidence, which is your direct quotes, and that's where it comes in for reviewing the lesson. Direct quotes are things you pull word for word, and you put quotation marks around it so it's not plagiarizing, but you take out word for word from another text to prove your answer or to prove your ideas and your thinking. So you always want to include that. In English, I always recommend answering questions in full sentences, because it almost always asks you to explain. So make sure you're explaining your ideas. Sometimes students won't get the 100% right answer, but I can see where they're thinking, and if the question's worth 5 points, you might get a couple points in there because you're actually really thinking about what the purpose was. And so I'm able to look at different ways to help you earn some points for the work you do. So always err on the side of explain your answer, because you never know what your teacher might do on the other end, okay? Does anyone have any questions? I'm hoping to hear from some of you. If there's other assignments you need help with, or I haven't picked my topic for the next time, I'd love to see what you might want some help on, that I can make sure we get some lessons going for these live sessions. You can privately chat to me. You can choose the 2-person and just do to Angelina. That's me. And I don't have to say your name or anything if you don't want me to. to answer the question, or you can shout out on the microphone, or just send a chat to everybody if you're okay with that too. Okay, I see some people are leaving, so I do want to say goodbye if you're ready to go. If you have other questions and want to hang out, I'll stay for a couple more minutes. Those of you who are saying thank you for the lesson, I really appreciate that you were here. And even email me if you want to after if you have more questions, and we can set up a time to talk, or I can just help you through email or chat through school, okay? Okay, so one of the questions I have is about touching on the formal speech. Is this the graduation speech, or is this the, well, either one doesn't matter, but one of them's a little bit more fun because in English 9 and English 10, we have a graduation speech, and then we have one for like your best friend's wedding. The big one with the formal speeches is to remember you're speaking. And I, as a teacher, know that these notes are meant for you to be speaking to someone. So you actually get to have a little bit less formal of a voice. The graduation one, obviously, if you're speaking at a big graduation, you want to have a little bit more of a formal voice. So you're not going to be like, hey, dude, what's up? You guys rock. You want to make sure that you actually are like, welcome to our graduation, and I want to talk to you about overcoming your fears and believing in yourself. But the big things to think about is you need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you're going to want to welcome people and explain what you want to talk to them about and why. And then in your body paragraphs, you're going to have 2 big paragraphs. One will be overcoming your fears. I think that's what it tells you in the prompt which one you're supposed to do, but it's something about overcoming your fears or taking risks. It's about taking risks. And you want to talk about a time you took a risk and it really paid off. So you're using that narrative material and using a story kind of element to help prove why taking risks are so important. And then the next body paragraph, you want to spend a good chunk of time talking about how it's important to believe in yourself. And once you believe in yourself, kind of how you can become more successful by believing in yourself. And then the final part is just a conclusion, thanking people for coming, reminding them why it's important to take risks and why it's important to believe in yourself. It is, even though you are speaking, a speech is kind of just a written or a spoken essay. So you do want that introduction, body, and conclusion. And then you also want to make sure that your grammar, because it is typed and turned in that way, that your grammar is the best you can get it. And that you're using, a big part of it is using those examples, those personal examples to prove your point. So you always want to support your ideas with evidence, but it's not like other people's evidence. The cool thing about the speeches is they get to be about you and how you've recognized taking risks are important and believing in yourself is important. So I hope that helped. The things I see in student work is a lot of them will only write one paragraph and they'll just kind of spit it all out and it's all just jumbled into one paragraph, and they don't focus enough on each of those two items of taking risks and believing in yourself. So really make sure you have your intro, your two body paragraphs, and your conclusion. And then really kind of remember you speak really fast, so you should actually have quite a bit of material inside your body in order to make it long enough, okay? So I hope that answered the question there. Fantastic. Is there do you guys have any other questions, those of you who are still around? Okay. If you have questions, I'm really good at responding via email. It's a lot faster for me because I get it on my phone, so I can actually respond quickly to that. My next session, that's a great question. I'm only doing every 2 weeks. So my next session, actually, I'm doing one August 2nd. Never mind. Sorry, I don't know if you all know, but I just came back from vacation. So I get to do 3 in August. So I'll be doing one on August 2nd. Is there a topic you'd like to see covered? Because I'd love ideas. So, but they're always Thursday for me at 4:30 Pacific time, so the same time. And I'll be doing them after the 2nd. I'll be doing them every other week. So I'll do one next Thursday, and then from there it's every 2 weeks. I watched one yesterday, and I believe she's doing them at the same time from another English teacher who's fantastic. And hers start at 12:30 to 1:30 Pacific time. So Mountain, I think, would be 1:30, Central 2:30, Eastern time would be 3:30. I know those are the 2 English ones, but mine are on Thursdays at the time that we started today. And that was a great question, so thank you. Okay, I'm gonna sign off and shut down the meeting. I'm really thankful that you guys were here and stuck in till the last minute, and I hope you come back next week.